I'm Noah Teller, 34, and I'm the oldest sibling by heart, not blood. Dinner was at my uncle's house this year, an enormous faux Tuscan estate with marble floors so glossy you could check your hair in them. The dining room table was long enough to seat a small jury, stretching from the fireplace to the bay windows that overlooked the winter garden. Crystal goblets, gold-edged plates, linen napkins so stiff they could have stood on their own. Everything screamed wealth, legacy, clean bloodlines. We weren't even halfway through the garlic-stuffed roast when the jokes started. I was seated at the far end of the table, 3 chairs down from my mother, who was deep in conversation with Aunt Sherry about some country club scandal. My foster siblings Jamie, Kira, and Marcus sat at the kids' table by the patio doors, though only Jamie still qualified as a kid. "Pass the rolls," said my cousin Dylan, already smirking. Unless Jamie ate them all. A few people chuckled, light, polite, effortless in its cruelty. Then cousin Rebecca chimed in. "I heard Kira's doing digital art now. So brave of her to major in unemployment." A wave of laughter. Not from everyone, but enough to make me pause mid-cut of my steak. Marcus said nothing. He just pushed his peas into a tight green wall at the edge of his plate and looked out the window. Face stony. Uncle Hank turned to me. "You still keeping those strays under your wing?" "Noah." And there it was. The word. Strays. It landed in my chest like a hard elbow. My fingers clenched around the fork. "I'd call them family," I said, quietly. A silence followed. Not respectful, more of a brief, bored pause, like someone had spoken too softly to be worth responding to. The next moment, chatter resumed. The old hierarchy reasserted itself. Jamie was a charity case, Kira, an artsy weirdo, Marcus unreadable, unimportant, and me, the sentimental fool who couldn't tell real kin from the rest. A waiter in a black vest leaned over me to refill my glass. "Would you like sparkling or still, sir?" Before I could answer, cousin Dylan interjected. "He'll take whatever the orphans are having." More laughter. I glanced at the kids' table. Jamie's eyes were wide and wet. Kira was frozen mid-bite. Marcus had gotten up quietly and slipped out the patio door. I pushed my chair back slowly. "I'm actually not drinking anything," I said. "Why not?" Aunt Sherry asked. "You're not offended, are you?" I stood, took my napkin off my lap, and laid it flat on the table. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "No, I just don't want to toast people who don't know the names in their own father's will." That silenced them. For a second, it was just the soft tinkling of a spoon against glass. Then I raised my voice not in anger, but for clarity. "You might want to know every one of those strays you mocked tonight. They're all named in it. Everyone." The room froze. It was as if the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. No one moved. Jamie's fork fell onto her plate with a clatter. Kira stared at me. Lips parted. Uncle Hank's eyebrows twitched. Aunt Sherry blinked 3 times, rapidly. I turned and walked toward the patio doors. If you've ever sat in a room full of relatives and felt like a ghost in your own story, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family dinners ever left you swallowing more than just food. I was halfway across the flagstone patio when someone stepped out from the shadows, a woman in a navy blue blazer, clipboard in hand. Dad's estate attorney, Miss Lambert. She gave me a faint smile. "I was wondering when you'd say something," she said, holding up the folder. "We're scheduled for the reading Monday." Should I inform the others? I glanced back through the window. They were all staring. "Yes," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Let them know who matters now." The only sound in the dining room was the crystal chandelier humming faintly in the silence, as every head turned toward the kids' table. And for once, They looked. The drive home from that dinner was quiet, but not empty. Kira sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed tight across her chest, her eyes flicking between the road and the window like she was afraid to be seen looking grateful. Jamie was in the back, hunched under her hoodie, biting the sleeve like she always did when she was overwhelmed. Marcus, as usual, said nothing. He just sat still, staring straight ahead like he was bracing for something worse. I didn't turn on the music. We'd learned not to fill silence with noise. Sometimes it's the only space where honesty could breathe. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light had already flicked on. The little yellow glow made our old house look warmer than it really was, peeling white paint. A screen door that screeched every time it opened. One cracked window pane that I still hadn't fixed. But it was home. Ours. Not because of blood, not because of name, because we chose each other. Jamie was the first one out of the car. "Do you think Grandpa really?" she started, then cut herself off. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. Yes. Kira gave me a sideways glance, even after everything. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I popped the trunk and carried in the leftover pie Aunt Sherry insisted I take. Charity sugar. I called it in my head. The kind of thing you're handed when someone wants to feel generous without being kind. Inside. The air was warm with leftover spaghetti from last night. Marcus finally spoke. "Why'd you do that?" he asked from the kitchen doorway. I set the pie down. "Do it?" He shrugged. "Tell them. The will? You didn't have to." I wiped my hands on a dish towel, leaned on the counter. "I did." "Why?" he said again, this time a little sharper. "We already knew. You told us months ago. You said it wasn't about proving anything." I nodded. It wasn't. Until it was. Marcus dropped into one of the mismatched kitchen chairs, shaking his head. "You just made it worse. You know that, right?" I looked at him, his jaw tight. His hands clenched on the table like he was holding himself together. He didn't mean the words the way they sounded. He never did. That was his thing. Anger was just armor for him. I didn't say it for them. I said it for her. I nodded toward the hallway, where Jamie's door had quietly clicked shut. Kira stood near the window, her back to us, arms still crossed. There had been too many nights in this house when someone came home crying because of something said at school, something whispered at church, something muttered by a neighbor who didn't understand what it meant to love children you didn't create. I couldn't erase those moments, but I could give them one thing, a moment where they weren't beneath anyone. Kira turned. "You said he hadn't told anyone, not even Mom." "He hadn't," I said. "But Lambert was there when he made the changes, and she kept the file sealed." Jamie peeked around the corner, tentative. "So, he really did put us in the will." I walked over, crouched beside her. "He didn't just put you in it. He left you the cabin." She blinked. "The one at the lake?" I smiled, said it reminded him of your drawings. Jamie didn't say anything, just nodded, slowly, like she didn't quite believe it but wanted to. The room settled again, the kind of quiet that feels like a breath finally being exhaled. I made hot chocolate. Kira lit the fake fireplace. Marcus retreated upstairs to blast his usual lo-fi protest music. And Jamie curled up on the couch with a blanket and her sketch pad, furiously scribbling something none of us would see until she was ready. For a long time, we had lived in the shadows of someone else's table. That's what people never tell you about foster siblings. Even when you're all legally adults, you never stop feeling like guests. You're constantly aware of the fact that someone once decided you were worth sheltering, but not necessarily claiming. I used to think love was enough to fill that space. Now I knew sometimes. You had to spell it out in ink and signatures, in deeds and titles. in wills. It wasn't about the money, it was about the legitimacy. I went into Dad's study that night. It hadn't been touched much since the funeral, just dusted and aired out. His old globe still sat cracked open, with pins marking the places he never made it to, a whiskey glass still on the coaster. His chair tucked in just slightly off-center, as if he'd just stepped out for a second. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, pulled out the folder Lambert had handed me weeks ago. Each page was thick, deliberate, typed out with signatures, dates, and stamped seals. Dad hadn't left much to me. A letter, his cufflinks, some savings. But the rest, it went to the kids, to the ones who needed it to mean something. He didn't say why, but he didn't have to. I remembered that last visit before he got too weak to talk, when Marcus was in the corner of the hospital room reading quietly and Jamie was asleep by the window. He'd turned to me, barely audible. "You did good. Thanks." I'd said, "No, really," he whispered. "You didn't let the world harden you." That night, I sat in his chair, reading that folder over and over, and I knew. That dinner, those jokes, those little cuts that tried to define my family's worth. They weren't just tasteless, they were obsolete. I put the documents back in the drawer, carefully, closed it with a soft click. Then I turned off the light. Back in the living room, Jamie had fallen asleep on the couch, sketchbook still on her chest. Kira was upstairs, probably scrolling for grad programs. Marcus was pacing his room again, like he always did when he couldn't figure out how to feel. I stood in the doorway a long time. We weren't born into the same stories, but somehow, we'd all ended up here. And this house, this patched together, rented heart kind of house, had become a chapter no one could take from us. Let them laugh, I thought. We had our own table now. The next morning, I woke to the sound of muffled voices downstairs, Kira talking softly on the phone in the kitchen, pacing in small loops between the counter and the fridge. I could tell by her tone it wasn't one of her friends. It was clipped, controlled. Probably one of Mom's calls again. Kira always handled those. Ever since the adoption was finalized. She never said why, but I knew Mom only ever called me when she needed something public, something polished. Kira was for the behind-the-scenes talk. I stayed in my room and listened, because he never told them. That's why. "No, I didn't know he was going to say it out loud." "Mom?" "No, I didn't ask him to." "Yeah, I know what they think of us." A pause. Then, more quietly, "He only did it because he loves us." Another pause. "No, not out of guilt, out of choice." I sat up in bed and ran my hand over my face. The smell of toast was creeping through the vents. My stomach growled, but I stayed there, listening to her voice like it was holding the house together. By the time I came down, she'd hung up. She didn't mention the call, just poured herself another cup of coffee and sat at the dining table, already half buried under Jamie's pencils and half-finished pages. "Marcus left early," she said. "Where to?" She shrugged. Said he needed air. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. "You okay?" She looked up, hair tied into a loose bun, dark circles under her eyes. "Are you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I said, "You remember that time in the group home, when Jamie was crying because someone called her the extra girl at school?" Kira nodded slowly. "She stayed in the supply closet until you brought her a peanut butter sandwich." "Yeah, and a napkin with a smiley face on it." She smiled faintly. "You used to draw those on everything. Backpacks, shoes, our bedroom wall." They made her laugh. Kira looked at me for a long time. "She doesn't cry like that anymore. That's the thing about being unwanted." I said, "After a while, you stop asking why. You just wait to be claimed. Her voice lowered. I don't think they'll ever claim us. I took a sip of my coffee and nodded. That's fine. We claimed each other. It wasn't until 2 days later that the fallout from the dinner started trickling in. Aunt Sherry sent me a message first. A long string of just wanted to clarify, and we didn't mean it that way, and everyone was just joking. I didn't respond. Then Dylan called. I didn't pick up. Then came the group chat, the extended family thread that had mostly gone dormant after Dad's death. It lit up like wildfire. Screenshots of the will announcement from that night were apparently circulating, and someone had even recorded part of the dinner conversation. Not the whole thing, just the part where I said their names were in the will. The video had made it to Facebook, and people were watching. A friend of Jamie's sent her the link. She brought her phone to the living room, eyes wide. Is this okay? She asked, holding it out. The video was shaky but clear. My voice, steady and calm, as I dropped the line. You might want to know every one of those strays you mocked tonight. They're all named in it. I watched myself say it again, watched the camera turn to the shocked faces, watched Jamie's own stunned expression at the kids' table. She didn't know she was being filmed. None of us did. I looked at her. Do you want it taken down? She hesitated, then slowly shook her head. No. I want people to see. So I shared it too. Not for revenge, not for clout, just for truth. The comments came quickly. This is what real family looks like. Blood doesn't mean love. That man did what every older sibling should. Protect those who weren't protected before. And with each one, Jamie seemed to sit a little taller. Kira smiled more often. Even Marcus, who'd barely said a word since the dinner, came home one evening and left his door open. We didn't talk about it much, just moved around the house with a little more breath in our lungs. A few days later, Ms. Lambert called. The reading is Monday, 10 a.m. sharp. She said, you'll need to be there in person. All of you. Including yes. She said gently. All three. We showed up early. The law office was in a downtown building with high ceilings and bad lighting. The waiting room smelled like old paper and lemon disinfectant. I wore my best shirt, the one Dad gave me when I started my first job. Kira wore all black, like she always did when she needed armor. Jamie had on a secondhand blazer she'd thrifted just last week, 2 sizes too big but worn like it was made for her. Marcus was late. He slipped in just as they called us back. The conference room was long and cold, a polished table in the center surrounded by chairs that looked older than all of us. The rest of the family was already seated. Mom, Aunt Sherry, Dylan, Rebecca. A few others I barely spoke to outside weddings and funerals. Their eyes followed us as we entered. Not hostile, not warm, just calculating. Ms. Lambert stood at the head of the table, folder in hand. Thank you all for coming. As you know, this is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Charles Teller. I watched them stiffen at the name. Charles. Not Dad. Not Uncle Charlie. Just formal, flat, final. The reading began. Most of the will was expected small amounts to various charities, instructions about the house, notes on investments. Then came the personal bequests. To Noah Teller. Lambert read, I leave the enclosed letter, my cufflinks, and the freedom to do what he always did best, take care of others. I felt a lump rise in my throat. To Jamie Collins. I leave the lakeside cabin and accompanying property, as well as the art supplies housed within. Jamie blinked. She hadn't known about that part. To Kira Dorsey. I leave my personal library and the travel fund in the account marked December Skies. Kira didn't move, but her jaw clenched. And to Marcus Vale. Lambert continued. I leave the motorcycle in the garage, the watch I wore every day for 15 years, and the deed to the small apartment in Greenpoint. Marcus sat forward, shocked. Wait. He left me an apartment. Lambert smiled faintly. He did. With full rights and title. The room was dead silent. Dylan opened his mouth, closed it. Aunt Sherry shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The will concluded with a single sentence. And to the rest of my blood, I leave only this the memory of what they refused to see. No one spoke. Not for a full minute. Then Jamie let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it her entire life. I glanced across the table. No one met my eye. We rose quietly and left. In the elevator down. No one said anything. But Kira reached for Jamie's hand, and Marcus leaned back and whispered. So now what? I looked at him. We go home. We didn't talk much on the way home. The city rolled by outside the windows, graffiti-streaked brick, boarded-up diners, billboards still advertising summer when autumn had already stripped the trees. Marcus had the window cracked open, the wind whipping through his sleeve. Jamie hummed something under her breath. Maybe a song she'd made up. Kira scrolled her phone, then turned it off without saying why. The silence wasn't heavy this time, just thoughtful, measured. Like all of us were building a new understanding in real time and didn't want to say it wrong. Back at the house, Jamie went straight to the backyard and stood barefoot in the patch of dying grass behind the porch. She just stood there, arms folded, looking up at the sky like she was waiting for something to land. I followed her out after a while, bringing the mail with me. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Yeah. I didn't think it would feel like that. Like what? Like proof. She said, rubbing her arms. Like I wasn't made up in this family. You were never made up. I said. You were chosen. Over and over. She turned to me, her voice almost a whisper. But it's different now, isn't it? I didn't lie. Yeah, it is. She looked back at the sky. I don't think they'll ever forgive him. Maybe not. Do you? I paused. The wind rustled the dead leaves by the fence. I don't think he was looking for forgiveness. I think he was finally telling the truth. Inside, Kira had opened the folder again and was rereading the itemized breakdown. Her hands hovered over each page like she was memorizing it by touch. She looked up when I stepped in. You know, she said. I used to imagine what he'd say if he ever told them. Like, I'd play the whole thing out in my head, where he calls a family meeting, sits them down, says he's proud of us, says he knows what they whispered behind closed doors. And then he cuts them out, she said with a small laugh. But I never imagined he'd do it after he died. It was the only time they'd listen. Kira looked at me sharply. They're still not listening. They're watching. That's different. She was right. The video had gone viral, not millions of views viral, but enough. Enough that strangers were tagging me in Facebook posts. Enough that some of the extended family started panicking. Cousin Rebecca posted a long, defensive Facebook essay about misunderstandings and how family jokes are being twisted by outsiders, but the comment section didn't agree with her. Nah, girl, you mocked his siblings. That's not a joke. The real ones know what it's like to be left out of the good china. Glad someone finally stood up and said it. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't need to. The truth had already taken root and started speaking for itself. Marcus walked in later with a rolled-up paper bag and a look I couldn't place, half exhausted, half alive. Went to see the apartment, he said, tossing the bag on the table. Yeah. He sat down. It's weird. Small. Has this ugly green tile in the kitchen, and a crooked faucet. You gonna take it? He looked at me, unreadable. He really left it to me. I nodded. You have the deed. He opened the bag and pulled out a dusty watch, the one Dad wore every Sunday, the one that stopped ticking the day he died. I always thought he forgot me, Marcus said, still staring at it. Like, I was just there, not invisible, but background. You weren't. He exhaled, slow and unsteady. Yeah, I believe that now. Kira folded the folder closed and tapped her nails against the wood table. So what happens next? I shrugged. We move on. We live. Jamie wandered in from the yard, feet dirty, hair tangled from the wind. Can we go to the cabin sometime? She asked. I smiled. Of course. Maybe even live there? Maybe, I said. When you're ready. That night, we made dinner together. Something simple: mac and cheese, a little salad, garlic bread from the freezer. No ceremony, no speeches. Just 4 people in a kitchen, moving around each other with the ease of long-held familiarity. Jamie put her sketchbook on the table while we ate. On the page was a charcoal drawing of a dinner table, not ours, theirs. Long and cold, with heads turned away, faces half erased. But at the end of the table sat a girl, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was drawn in full, and above her, in looping letters, she'd written. The seat I was never offered became the one they envied. None of us said a word. We didn't need to. Later that week, Miss Lambert called again. She said the paperwork was final. The accounts would transfer. The cabin, the apartment, the personal items, all legally ours. She asked if I wanted to attend the next family meeting. Apparently, Aunt Sherry was calling one, privately, to restore some harmony. I asked if any of them had said sorry. She said no. I declined. A few days after that, a letter arrived, handwritten, from Mom. It was short. Noah, I hope you know this isn't what your father would have wanted. Family doesn't work like this. It's about loyalty, tradition. I hope you come to your senses. Mom. I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer next to the will. Then I wrote a letter back. Mom, I know exactly what Dad wanted. He wanted truth, even if it made people uncomfortable. He wanted us to be seen. We are love. Noah, I didn't send it. Some things aren't meant to be replied to. Some things are only meant to be understood in silence. Weeks passed. We adjusted. Kira started applying to grad schools again, this time without hesitation. Jamie was invited to exhibit her work at a local youth gallery. Marcus slowly packed for the move to Greenpoint, though he came home every weekend. One night, he brought pizza. We ate on the floor of the living room, plates in laps, watching a terrible old sci-fi movie from the thrift store bargain bin. Halfway through, Jamie leaned her head on my shoulder. I think I'm not angry anymore, she said. That's good. She looked up at me. Are you? I thought about it. The years of being dismissed, of second-guessing what kind of love we deserved. The comments that stung long after they were spoken. The nights I pretended the jokes didn't get to me. And then, the moment their silence turned to attention. Not apology, not redemption, but finally they looked. I looked at her. No, I'm not angry, I said. I'm done waiting. She smiled. Me too. And just like that, the tension broke. No confrontation, no grand closing statement. Just a quiet moment on a floor we owned, with laughter humming in the corners and truth finally sitting comfortably between us. We didn't need their table anymore. We'd built our own. 3 months passed. By spring, the snow was gone, and with it, the tightness in my chest that I hadn't known I'd been carrying for years, the kind that settles in your shoulders after too many family dinners pretending not to hear, not to feel, not to defend. We painted the porch. Jamie picked the color storm blue. She said it reminded her of the lake just before it rained. I didn't argue. I let her smear streaks across the wood in messy arcs while Marcus drilled in the new railings. Kira oversaw the whole thing like a site manager. Hands on hips. Hair tied up in a knot. She refused to admit was cute. We were rebuilding slowly, piece by piece. Not because we were broken, but because now we could. Kira had moved her books into Dad's old shelves, encyclopedias and law journals beside fantasy novels and poetry. Marcus hung his watch by the door, next to the keys, like a quiet ritual. Jamie's sketchbook lived on the kitchen table now, open and unapologetic. Graphite dust smudged across everything like she belonged to the wood itself. And me, I was learning how to breathe again, for the first time in years. There was no looming dinner invitation, no expectation to perform the role of grateful son, polite half-brother, harmless add-on. I wasn't waiting for the next holiday to prove myself. The weight of that silence of finally being left out felt like freedom. One Saturday, the mailman brought a heavy envelope stamped in gold. Kira opened it first. A wedding invitation, she said, holding it up with 2 fingers like it smelled bad. Whose? I asked. Rebecca? I rolled my eyes. Of course. It was a destination wedding. Vineyard, June, black tie optional, but please no casual fabrics. Marcus leaned over and read the RSVP card. So we're not invited individually, he said. Just Noah Teller plus family. They don't even know our names, Kira muttered. Jamie took the card, read it, and placed it face down. Are we going? I looked at her. What do you want? She shrugged. I kind of want to show up in jeans. Marcus grinned. I want to show up with the deed to the apartment and a printed copy of the will. Kira sighed. I want to show up, say nothing, and watch them squirm. I waited for a beat. Then we go, I said. The vineyard was 3 hours away, tucked in some manicured countryside where everything smelled like wealth and effort. We rented a cabin nearby, not the lake one, not yet, and drove up the night before, crammed into one car, laughing too loud at gas stations, eating dry sandwiches with too much mustard. We didn't plan what we'd wear. Kira pulled out a sleek black jumpsuit with a velvet belt and combat boots. Jamie wore a floral dress and sneakers. Marcus showed up in a perfectly tailored suit that I swear he borrowed from someone twice his size, sleeves rolled just high enough to show his tattoo. I wore Dad's old tie, the one from his wedding, the one he never got around to giving me until he was dying. The vineyard was glowing with fairy lights and soft piano music. Guests milled around sipping champagne and saying things like organic grapes and curated ceremony. When we stepped onto the grass, heads turned. Not because we were loud, not because we made a scene, but because we didn't shrink. Aunt Sherry spotted us first. Her face flickered shock, then calculation. She walked over, wineglass in hand. Noah, she said. I didn't think you'd come. I smiled. You invited my family. Her eyes flicked to the others. Of course. Well, I hope there are no surprises tonight. Don't worry, I said. We're not here to be seen, just to witness. She opened her mouth, but I was already walking past her. We stood in the back during the ceremony. No one offered us seats, but we didn't need them. Rebecca walked down the aisle in a veil so long it dragged across the grass like smoke. Dylan stood as her best man, eyes twitching when he caught sight of us. At the altar, the officiant began to speak something about loyalty, about choosing your people, about legacy and trust. I looked at Jamie. She didn't cry. After the ceremony, we drifted toward the reception, standing near the edge of the crowd. We weren't offered champagne. We weren't greeted by name. But then, something shifted. An older woman in pearls walked over, holding a glass and smiling politely. You're the ones from the video, she said. We all froze. I just wanted to say, It was beautiful. What you did. What he did. It mattered. I nodded, unsure what to say. She leaned in. I have 2 adopted grandkids. I saw how people looked at them. That video made me want to stand taller for them. She walked away without asking for a picture, just left her words in the air like petals. Later, another woman approached Jamie. Are you the artist? She asked. Jamie blinked. I guess. She held out a hand. I run a gallery in the city. I saw your work online, the one with the table. I'd love to talk. Jamie's mouth opened. No words came. I stepped beside her. She'll call you Monday, I said. Back at the cabin that night. We ate leftover wedding cake and laughed about the shrimp skewers no one could identify. Kira kicked off her boots. You think they'll remember we were there? Probably, I said. But not why, Jamie added. Marcus looked at us. Does it matter? We all paused. Then, quietly, I answered. No, it matters that we remember. Because for once, we didn't show up needing their approval. We showed up as proof of survival, of love, of being built from choice, not blood, from loyalty, not lineage. We weren't the story they told. We were the story they couldn't erase. Back home. The porch waited for us, blue and bright under the moonlight. We stood there a moment before heading in. Kira reached for the handle, then stopped. You know, she said, I don't think I ever imagined us making it this far. Past what Marcus asked. Past doubt. Jamie leaned against me. You were always sure. Noah, she said, even when we weren't. I smiled. I was never sure. I whispered, but I was never going to stop. We went inside, left our shoes by the door, and just like that, we were home again. It was early summer when we finally visited the lake. Jamie drove us in the beat-up SUV, windows down, the air thick with pine and pollen. Kira had packed sandwiches and old blankets, and Marcus brought his camera, though he mostly let it sit in his lap like a forgotten thought. I sat in the passenger seat and just watched. The trees grew denser the closer we got. Their shadows swept across the dashboard like fingers tracing back old memories. Jamie took the winding turns slowly, reverently. She hadn't been to the cabin since she was 11. Neither had I. We pulled up just before noon. The cabin looked almost the same. Weathered wood, sun-bleached porch, a faded welcome mat with half the letters gone. The screen door hung crooked. The flower pots were empty, long cracked from frost. But the lake, it glittered like glass behind the trees, just beyond the back steps. Jamie was the first to get out. She stood for a moment, her hand on the hood, staring. Do you remember the summer with the fireflies? She asked. No, Kira said gently. Tell us. Jamie walked slowly toward the porch. I was so small, and there were hundreds of them, glowing all around this cabin. Dad told me they were little messengers, carrying memories through the trees. Marcus stepped up beside her. You believed him? Of course, she said, a soft smile on her lips. He never gave me a reason not to. We unpacked in silence. No rush, no schedule, just time. Inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and dust. The furniture was old, but clean. The walls were lined with books, a few chipped mugs, a faded photo of Dad on the dock with all of us squinting in the sun. There was even a box of Jamie's old art supplies in the corner, sealed tight. She knelt beside it like it was a relic. These are mine, she whispered. He kept them. Kira brushed a cobweb off the window. He didn't just keep them. He saved them. Marcus lit the fireplace, even though it wasn't cold. Just something about the crackle, the smell, it pulled us together. We ate on the back steps. Nothing fancy, Just food we'd touched with our own hands. Jamie laid out a towel and began sketching the lake almost immediately. Kira read. Marcus took a few photos, then put the camera away and stared out across the water. I think this is the first time I feel safe, he said. No one answered. We just let the words sit. Later. I wandered into the woods behind the cabin. The trail was still there, faint but real. I followed it until I reached the old clearing with the stone bench where Dad used to take us one by one. I remembered him sitting here with Marcus once, the two of them barely talking, just tossing pine cones into the distance like they were throwing away silence. I sat there now, alone. The wind moved gently through the trees, and then I heard her behind me. You were the one who saved us. You know, Kira. She sat beside me, knees pulled to her chest. No, I said. He did. He made it legal. But you made it real. We sat for a long time. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Mom called me again. I turned to her. She said they're revising their wills, that things are being reconsidered, and I told her we're not waiting for scraps anymore. She looked at me, eyes glassy. We never were. I said. We just didn't know how to say it. Kira leaned her head against my shoulder. They're angry. You know that. Right. They'll get over it. No, she said. They won't. But that's not our job. She was right. We walked back to the cabin as the sun dipped lower, coloring the lake in oranges and silvers. Jamie was asleep on the porch, curled around her sketchbook. Marcus was lighting candles in jars, his quiet way of making any space feel sacred. That night, we made a fire by the water. No music, just the sound of crackling wood, the soft hum of crickets, and the occasional hoot of an owl watching from the trees. Jamie stirred first. She sat beside me and handed me her sketchbook. I flipped through it slowly. There were drawings of all of us. At the house, at the wedding, in the car, laughing, crying. One of me standing at the dinner table, my mouth mid-sentence, the room blurry behind me, and one of the will open, signed, sealed. You drew the moment, I said. She nodded, because they won't remember it right. I handed it back. But we will. Marcus added another log to the fire. Kira opened a bottle of wine. None of us talked about the family we'd left behind, not because we hated them, but because, for the first time, they weren't with us. Not in our thoughts, not in our decisions, not at our fire. And that meant something. I looked at each of them, these people I hadn't chosen with my head, but with my heart. These not quite siblings who had become more family than anyone who shared my DNA. They weren't foster kids anymore. They weren't guests. They were mine. The fire burned low. Marcus leaned back, hands behind his head. You know, if Dad hadn't left the will the way he did, none of this would have happened. He didn't just leave a will, I said. He left instructions. For what? For how to be brave, I said. Even when you're not the favorite, even when you're not wanted, even when they laugh. Jamie looked at me. Do you think he was brave? I watched the last flame flicker out. Yeah, I said, because he did it quietly. And let us speak for ourselves. We went to bed one by one. The cabin was dark, but it didn't feel lonely. Before I fell asleep, I walked back out to the porch one more time. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, quiet and wide. I thought about the names in that will. How strange it must have looked to the others, how loud it must have sounded to be told, finally, that we mattered. I leaned on the railing. If you've ever been told you didn't belong, I whispered to the dark, build your own home, and write your own names into it. Behind me, Jamie stirred in her sleep. The cabin creaked, And I finally felt whole. By late July, the letters started coming in, not just from relatives but from strangers, people who had seen the video, read the posts, watched it pass from one hand to another like a secret people didn't know they needed to hear. The messages were long, trembling things, handwritten on torn notebook paper or typed in plain, emotionless fonts, folded, sealed, stamped with hesitation, and every single one carried the same feeling someone saw me. The first one came from a woman in Ohio. She said she'd been adopted at 13 and spent her whole life being introduced as the rescue at family barbecues. Another came from a man in Ontario who raised his wife's younger siblings after their parents died and never once was called brother. One girl wrote from a dorm room in Georgia. She didn't know her birth family. She didn't know her foster family either. Not really, but she knew what it meant to hear someone say, "You matter. You belong." Kira took the letters and made a box for them, an old shoebox wrapped in butcher paper, taped at the edges, covered in doodles Jamie drew with permanent marker. We called it the Box of Truth. Every Sunday, we'd take turns reading one aloud. Some were angry, some were grateful. Some sounded like they were written with tears still drying on the page. I didn't respond to all of them, but I kept every single one, because once you've been invisible, there's something holy about being held in someone else's words. One morning, I woke to find Marcus on the porch, with one of the letters clutched in his hand. He didn't say anything for a while, just held it, fingers trembling slightly. "It's from a guy in New Mexico," he said. "He aged out of the system last year. Said he doesn't even have a couch to sleep on." I nodded, waiting. Marcus looked out over the street. "I think I want to rent the apartment out." To him, he shrugged. To someone like him, someone who just needs a start. "You sure?" "Yeah," he said. "I don't need a whole place to prove I'm real." That afternoon, he posted an ad. Quiet Greenpoint apartment for someone rebuilding. Rent negotiable. Must have heart. The responses flooded in. Jamie kept painting. Her drawing from the wedding the girl at the end of the table was now framed at a local cafe downtown. People asked if it was from a dream. She said, "No. It was from the moment my life turned." She didn't tell them what moment. That was hers to keep. Kira got into Columbia. A full scholarship. I still don't know how she managed it. She didn't want a party. Just a quiet dinner with us, some candles, and a playlist of old songs she loved when we were kids. We toasted with lemonade and mismatched glasses. To the things we thought we couldn't have, I said, raising mine. "And to the ones who never stopped trying anyway," Jamie added. That night, Mom called again. She hadn't tried in weeks. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Her voice was calm, clipped, rehearsed. "I heard about Kira. I'm proud of her. She always was smart." There was a pause. "And Marcus, what he's doing with the apartment, that's very charitable." "It's not charity," I said. "It's family." More silence. Then she said it. The thing I didn't expect. "I didn't know he was going to do that." "Your father. Does it matter?" She sighed. "It's complicated." "It's not. He saw them. You didn't." Another pause. "You've changed. Noah." "No." I stopped apologizing. "I suppose that's the same thing." "Not really," I said. "But it feels better." I didn't hang up. I let the silence stretch. She didn't say sorry. She didn't ask to visit. She just asked. Finally. After a long breath. "Are you coming for Thanksgiving?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, "Will there be enough seats?" That ended the call. We didn't go. Thanksgiving came and went. Just the four of us. a chicken instead of a turkey, a pie that Jamie overbaked but no one complained about. Marcus lit the fire. Kira played old jazz records. We stayed up late playing board games we didn't understand and laughing too hard to care. No one fought. No one made backhanded jokes. It was the first holiday I didn't wake up dreading. The will had done more than distribute property. It had closed a chapter. I never realized I was still stuck inside. People think inheritance is about money. It's not. It's about being claimed. It's about someone saying, "I see you, and I leave you proof." I still kept the original copy of the will in the drawer by my bed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open it not to read it, but just to feel the weight of it. The paper was thick, expensive, permanent. Jamie made a tiny sculpture of it, an open scroll, miniature and delicate, out of clay. She gave it to me for Christmas. "It's the moment everything turned," she said. I placed it on my shelf beside Dad's cufflinks. In January, something strange happened. Dylan reached out. A text. No preamble. Just, "Can we meet?" I stared at it for a while. Kira saw it first. "You don't have to," she said. "I know. But if you do, don't go alone. We met at a diner. I brought Marcus." Dylan was already seated, sipping black coffee. No food in front of him. His suit was sharp, but his face looked tired. Less smug. More hollow. "Thanks for coming," he said. Marcus folded his arms, said nothing. Dylan cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say, you were right." I raised an eyebrow. "About what about them? About us?" I thought I was supposed to protect the bloodline, or whatever garbage they raised us on. Turns out, I was just defending my place in a broken system. Marcus snorted. "Bit late for that." "I know," Dylan said, "but I didn't want to be quiet anymore." He slid an envelope across the table. "What's this statement for the family newsletter?" I blinked. "There's a newsletter." "Yeah, and next month, they're going to read this." I opened it. A single paragraph. "If family means anything, it must be chosen daily." I watched Noah choose his, and I stayed silent. I won't anymore. You don't have to be born into something for it to be sacred. Sometimes, the ones who love the loudest are the ones you never gave a chair to. That's on us. I didn't say thank you. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I didn't need him to do it for me. He needed to do it for himself. When Marcus and I left the diner, the sky was starting to snow. He looked at me. "Do you believe him?" I shrugged. "It doesn't matter." He nodded. "No, it really doesn't." And that was the most honest thing we'd ever said. That spring, the four of us went back to the cabin again. We planted wildflowers by the porch. We built new shelves. Jamie started painting the ceiling with constellations. Kira made lists of books to stock the place for future visitors. Marcus brought a guest, someone from the apartment who'd never seen a lake before, and I just watched. Not like a leader, not like a savior, just a brother. A real one. The only kind that matters. By the time summer turned its corner, I had stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. It wasn't a decision. It just happened. No more waking up in anticipation of some old relative texting an apology they didn't mean, or bracing for another article resharing the dinner video with a caption that made us sound braver than we felt. The world kept moving, and we had settled into something quieter, less dramatic, more lived. The cabin became our rhythm. Weekends blurred into weeks. Marcus started a small mentorship program out of the apartment. No press, no formal nonprofit. Just a list taped to the door with names and mealtimes. 3 kids who showed up hungry and left with resumes, portfolios, and someone who finally remembered their birthdays. Jamie's art got picked up for a local exhibit downtown. A woman from the city came to the opening, stood silently in front of her piece titled, "The Table Was Already Set," and wrote a blank check. Jamie donated half to a youth shelter. The other half she used to buy a new kiln, though she still insisted on using the old broken brushes with duct-taped handles. Kira moved into the dorms at Columbia in September. We helped her pack her books, some so worn the spines had peeled, and the string lights she insisted were purely decorative, but secretly comforting. She hugged Jamie the longest, told Marcus to write, even though he'd already said he would. She hugged me last. "You were always the gravity," she whispered. I said nothing, just held on. Her room was small, full of energy and newness and the smell of ambition. We left her there with a photo of all four of us, tucked into the corner of her mirror. Jamie cried on the ride home. She didn't say it was because Kira was gone. She just pressed her face to the window and let the tears roll. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. I reached back and held her hand. That was enough. Back at the house. It felt different. Not empty, but less tethered. The space Kira left behind didn't collapse. It expanded. Jamie took over the front room as a studio. Marcus began cooking more. I started waking up early and walking the block before breakfast. It was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel lonely anymore. Then one day, the doorbell rang. It was Mom. She stood there holding a lemon pie, wrapped in foil. Her makeup was heavy. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't ask to come in, just said, "I was driving past." Jamie stared from the kitchen. Marcus leaned in the hallway doorway, arms crossed. I opened the screen but didn't say anything. She looked past me. "Is this still your house?" I tilted my head. "Was it ever yours?" She exhaled. "I brought pie. You always did like arriving with sugar after something bitter." That hurt her. I saw it. "I know I didn't handle things well," she said. Marcus muttered. "Understatement of the decade." She glanced at him but didn't push back. "I didn't know how to be open. When your father changed the will, I felt like I lost control of something I built." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. We stood on the porch together, the sun warming the paint Jamie had chosen a year ago. "You didn't build us," I said. "You hosted us. For appearances." Her lip quivered. "I know. And I'm sorry." It didn't land. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it wasn't for me to accept on behalf of everyone. She held the pie out. "For Jamie." I didn't take it. "You can give it to her yourself." Inside, Jamie hesitated, then walked over, opened the door, and took the pie with both hands. Mom smiled at her. "I heard about the exhibit. Thanks. You're very talented." "I know." A pause. Jamie added, "And I'm not yours to compliment." Then she closed the door softly. Mom didn't cry. She just stood there, holding her purse, nodding slowly. "I guess that's what I deserve," she said. I didn't answer, because it wasn't about punishment. It never had been. It was about recognition. And sometimes, when you're too late, the people you want to reach have already walked ahead without you. She left quietly. We didn't speak of it again. In October, Jamie turned 18. We held a bonfire in the backyard with sparklers and cider and an old speaker playing her favorite songs. Kira video called in from her dorm. Marcus grilled hot dogs and forgot to bring napkins. I made a cake, half burned, and Jamie ate 3 slices anyway. She gave a small toast at the end, standing by the fire with one hand raised like she was conducting something ancient. "To all the people who thought I'd never be worth a speech," she said, "this is mine." We clapped until the neighbors told us to quiet down. At night, I walked out to the porch again, the same spot I always ended up. The stars were clear. The wind was shifting toward winter. Marcus came out and sat next to me. You think this is it? He asked. What? This piece? I thought about it. The dinners we weren't invited to anymore. The family threads we were left out of. The absence of drama. The new messages from strangers. The kids Marcus was mentoring. The art Jamie was making. The words Kira was writing. The stillness in my chest that had taken years to build. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's just the start. He nodded. I like it here. Me too. Inside, Jamie was asleep on the couch, paint on her fingers. The pie Mom brought was still untouched on the counter. We didn't throw it away. We just didn't need it. We went to the cabin the next weekend, just the three of us this time. Jamie brought a stack of blank canvases. Marcus packed the same old flannel he wore every year, full of holes and covered in pine needles. I brought Dad's watch. We didn't say much. We just existed there, free from needing to explain who we were to anyone. The lake was still. The fire would dry. The air sharp enough to sting a little when you breathed too deep. Jamie hung a painting over the cabin fireplace, 4 figures at a table, each outlined in gold. The rest of the canvas was black. No walls, no crowd, just us, and stars above. We lit the fire and sat in its glow. No one called, no one interrupted. No one had power over this place anymore. Later, as we packed to leave, Jamie said something I'll never forget. You know, they laughed at us once. I looked up, and now she smiled. They can't find us. And she was right. We weren't lost anymore. We were simply elsewhere. Ourselves. And we didn't need a single chair at their table. We had our own, made from real wood, shared stories, signed names, unshakable, unbreakable, chosen.